He was not supposed to do it. On a bitter February morning in 1946, in the shattered city of Hamburg, a 23-year-old British private stood at a street corner with a rifle on his shoulder and strict orders in his pocket. His job was simple: keep order, guard military stores, do not hand out army rations to civilians. The war was over, but discipline remained. Every tin of meat, every biscuit, every spoonful of powdered milk was counted. If a soldier gave food away without permission, he could face punishment. Then a woman stepped out of the ruins. She was thin enough to look older than her 32 years. Her coat hung loosely over her frame. Her shoes were patched with pieces of cardboard. Snow clung to the hem of her dress. In one hand she held the wrist of a little girl. Behind her, two boys watched from a doorway where there was no door, only a blanket nailed across the opening. Her lips trembled as she approached the British soldier. She had lived through 6 years of war, nights of fire, and months of hunger. Yet this short walk across a broken street was one of the hardest things she had ever done. When she finally spoke, she asked for food. What the British soldier did next would shock her, and stay with her family for the rest of their lives. Private Thomas Bennett of the British Army had not come to Germany looking for sympathy. He had joined the army in 1941 at the age of 18, shortly after the Blitz. As a teenager in London, he had helped pull bricks from bombed houses and watched rescue crews carry out neighbors wrapped in blankets. His younger sister, Elsie, had suffered through years of rationing. His father, a dock worker, had spent nights on fire watch. Like many British soldiers, Thomas carried memories of ruined streets and air raid sirens. He fought in northwest Europe after the Normandy landings. He crossed France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. He saw villages flattened by artillery and civilians wandering with what they could carry. In April 1945, he entered Germany. The war ended a few weeks later, but Thomas did not go home. Instead, he remained as part of the British occupation forces. By early 1946, the fighting was over, but Germany was collapsing in a different way. Cities lay in ruins. Rail lines were damaged. Coal was scarce. Farms produced less than before the war. Millions of refugees poured westward from territories lost in Eastern Europe. The winter of 1946 was especially harsh. In many places, adults survived on little more than watery soup, black bread, and turnips. Children searched through rubble for bits of coal. Mothers traded family heirlooms for potatoes. Hamburg had suffered terribly during the war, especially after the devastating firestorm of July 1943. Whole districts were reduced to ash. Even in 1946, the city looked as if the bombing had ended only yesterday. Walls stood without roofs. Streets were lined with bricks, twisted steel, and shattered glass. At night, cold wind moved through empty windows and broken stairwells. Anna Fischer lived with her 3 children in what remained of an apartment building in the Hamburg district. Her husband, Karl, had been drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1944 and killed near Nigsburg early in 1945. Anna received official notice months later, delivered by a local administrator who had no condolences left to offer. Since then, survival had become her full-time occupation. Her eldest son, 9-year-old Peter, was old enough to understand hunger. He stopped asking when his father would return. He asked instead whether there would be bread. 7-year-old Marta had developed a dry cough that worsened in the cold. 5-year-old Lucas cried at night from stomach pains. Anna often pretended she was not hungry so the children would eat slightly larger portions. By February 1946, she had sold nearly everything of value. Her wedding ring bought a sack of potatoes. Karl's wristwatch was exchanged for 2 loaves of bread. A silver serving spoon from her mother became a few handfuls of dried peas. There was nothing left to trade. On the evening before she approached the British soldier, Anna boiled water with cabbage leaves and a single turnip. The children ate in silence. Peter licked the spoon after his bowl was empty. Marta asked whether there would be breakfast. Anna said yes, though she had nothing left. That night, she did not sleep. Wind hissed through cracks in the walls. The children lay under coats and blankets, curled together for warmth. Anna sat beside them and listened to their breathing. She thought about stealing, about walking farther into the countryside, about asking neighbors who had even less than she did. Before dawn, she made a decision she had resisted for weeks. She would beg. British soldiers were stationed near a supply depot several streets away. Anna had seen them marching, laughing, and smoking cigarettes. To many Germans, occupation troops inspired mixed feelings: fear, shame, resentment, and cautious hope. Some soldiers were stern, some ignored civilians completely. Rumors spread quickly about punishments for theft and black market activity. Hannah did not know what would happen if she approached one. But she knew what would happen if she did not. At around 8 o'clock on the morning of February 14, 1946, Anna took Marta by the hand and walked through the snow-covered streets. Peter and Lucas stayed in the doorway, watching their mother disappear into the gray morning. Private Bennett was on sentry duty outside a fenced warehouse containing food, blankets, and medical supplies. He stamped his boots against the cold and pulled his greatcoat tighter. He had 1 hour left before being relieved. Then he saw the woman coming toward him. At first, Thomas assumed she wanted directions or permission to pass. But as she drew closer, he noticed her sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. The child beside her looked too weak to speak. Thomas had seen hunger before, but there was something in the woman's expression that stopped him. It was not anger, not pride, not even desperation alone. It was the exhausted look of someone who had run out of every other option. Anna removed her cap. Her hands shook so badly she had trouble holding it. In broken English, she asked if he had any food for her children. Thomas did not answer immediately. Army regulations were clear. Soldiers were not to distribute official rations without authorization. Supplies were limited, and uncontrolled handouts could attract crowds and disorder. Thomas knew all of this. He also knew that many British families at home were still rationing butter, meat, and sugar. Food was precious everywhere. He looked at the little girl. Her face reminded him of his sister Elsie in 1941, standing in a London queue with a ration book in her hand. Thomas felt two wars colliding in his mind. One was the war he had fought against Germany. The other was the quieter war against hunger, which did not care about nationality. He reached into his coat and removed the lunch he had packed for his shift: 2 biscuits, a tin of bully beef, and a chocolate bar his mother had sent from home. He held the items for a second. The chocolate bar was personal. British civilians could not easily spare sweets in 1946. His mother had included it with a short note that read, "For when you need cheering." Thomas placed all of it into Anna's hands. For a moment she did not move. She stared at the food as if she could not understand what she was seeing. Then she began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet release after months of holding herself together. Marta's eyes widened at the sight of the chocolate. Anna tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She bowed her head repeatedly and clutched the food to her chest as though someone might take it away. Thomas thought the encounter was over. But that was not what shocked Anna. As she turned to leave, Thomas leaned closer and spoke softly. He told her to return to the same corner after dark. Anna froze. She had no idea what he meant. Was it a trick? Was he setting a test? Would military police arrest her? The fear of occupation was still real, and trust did not come easily in a defeated country. Thomas simply nodded and resumed his post. Anna hurried home. The children devoured the biscuits and bully beef with a speed that frightened her. Thomas insisted she save some for later, but the smell alone made restraint nearly impossible. The chocolate was divided into 4 careful pieces. Marta closed her eyes as it melted in her mouth. Peter asked where it came from. Anna said a British soldier had given it to them. The children were stunned. That evening, Anna faced a difficult choice. She wanted to believe Thomas meant to help. She also feared walking into danger. But when she looked at her children, thin and pale under the weak light of a candle stub, she knew she had to go. At 7:30, she returned to the street corner. Thomas was waiting. He was not alone. Beside him stood a small handcart covered with a canvas sheet. Thomas glanced up and down the street, then lifted the canvas. Inside were 2 tins of corned beef, powdered milk, tea, sugar, a loaf of bread, several army biscuits, soap, and a blanket. Anna stared in disbelief. This was not a snack. It was survival. Thomas explained in simple terms that the items came from his own rations and from contributions by 2 friends in his unit, Corporal James Wilkes and Driver Arthur Collins. Thomas had told them about the children. Both men had quietly offered part of their own supplies. The blanket had come from Wilkes, who said children needed warmth more than he did. Anna covered her mouth with both hands. In occupied Germany, many civilians had become used to indifference, suspicion, and official rules. She had hoped for a crust of bread. Instead, 3 former enemies had pooled their personal food and comfort items to keep her children alive. Thomas helped pull the cart to her building. Peter and Lucas met them at the entrance. When the boys saw the bread, their eyes went wide. When they saw the blanket and tins, they stood speechless. Thomas knelt and handed the loaf to Peter. The boy held it like treasure. Inside the apartment, the British soldiers saw the full reality of the family's condition. Frost coated the inside of the walls. The stove held only a few pieces of coal. Furniture consisted of 2 chairs, a table, and mattresses stuffed with rags. Yet the room was clean. Anna had preserved what dignity she could. Marta tugged at Thomas's sleeve and offered him the smallest piece of chocolate she had saved from that morning. Thomas almost broke down. He gently refused and told her to keep it. Over the following weeks, Thomas and his friends continued to help when they could. They did not steal from army stores. They shared from their own allotted rations and occasional parcels from home. Sometimes they brought tinned meat. Sometimes milk powder for the children. Sometimes soap, candles, or old clothing. They were careful. Military authorities tolerated some informal charity, but soldiers were expected to avoid creating dependency or crowds. Thomas kept the assistance discreet. He never spoke about heroism. To him, the matter was simple. If children were starving and he had food, he would share it. The impact on the Fisher family was immediate. Marta's cough began to improve. Lucas stopped waking in pain every night. Peter regained enough strength to collect firewood and attend makeshift classes organized by local teachers. Anna no longer faced the daily terror of watching her children weaken. For the first time since Carl's death, she felt that the future might contain something other than loss. As trust grew, Anna and Thomas spoke more openly. Thomas learned that Carl Fisher had been a railway mechanic, not a committed Nazi. Like millions of men, he had been drafted and sent to the front. Anna learned that Thomas had lost friends in France and Belgium. He rarely discussed combat, but when he did, his voice became quiet and distant. Both understood that war had taken people they loved. Neither tried to excuse what had happened in Europe. Thomas had seen enough to know the scale of Germany's crimes. Anna, like many ordinary Germans, was confronting painful truths about what had been done in the name of her country. Their conversations were not about politics. They were about children, grief, and the strange fact that compassion had survived when so much else had been destroyed. In March 1946, Thomas received a letter from his mother. He wrote back and described the Fisher children. Weeks later, a parcel arrived from London addressed to Private Bennett. Inside were knitted socks, canned food, and a note for the little ones. Anna wept when Thomas translated the message. A woman in England, still living under rationing herself, had chosen to feed the children of a former enemy. The winter slowly loosened its grip. Rubble was cleared. Markets reopened. Aid shipments increased. Conditions remained difficult, but the worst of the hunger began to ease. In June 1946, Thomas learned that he would soon be demobilized and sent home. Telling Anna was harder than he expected. They had never become family in the ordinary sense, but something deep connected them. In the darkest months of her life, Thomas had appeared with bread and kindness. For Thomas, the Fishers reminded him why he had wanted the war to end, so children could grow up without fear. On his final visit, Anna prepared the best meal she could manage: potato soup thickened with carrots, and a small piece of sausage acquired through careful saving. The children cleaned the room and placed wildflowers in a jar. After dinner, Peter handed Thomas a drawing. It showed a British soldier standing beside 3 children and a loaf of bread larger than all of them. Thomas folded the drawing and placed it in his wallet. Anna then presented him with Carl's fountain pen, one of the few possessions she had kept. Thomas initially refused. Anna insisted. She told him the pen should belong to a man who had used his hands to save lives instead of take them. Thomas accepted it in silence. The next morning, before boarding transport for England, he visited the family one last time. Marta hugged him tightly. Lucas saluted awkwardly, imitating British soldiers. Peter tried to remain composed but could not stop crying. Anna stood in the doorway. There were many things she wanted to say. In the end, she chose the simplest truth. When she had approached him that February morning, she believed the war had taken everything. He had shown her that humanity still existed. Thomas returned to London and resumed civilian life. He worked as a clerk, married, and raised 2 daughters. He kept Peter's drawing and Carl's fountain pen in a small box with his wartime letters. Anna rebuilt her life in Hamburg. Peter became an engineer. Marta trained as a nurse. Lucas opened a small repair shop. All 3 children remembered the British soldier who had arrived with a handcart full of food on a winter night. Years later, in 1963, Peter traveled to England on business. Carrying the old drawing, now worn at the edges, he located Thomas Bennett in suburban London. When Thomas opened the door, he saw a grown man holding a child's sketch. For a second, neither spoke. Then Thomas recognized the picture. The 2 men embraced. Peter told him something he had waited 17 years to say. His family had survived because of what Thomas did. Without that help during the hunger winter, he believed at least one of the children might have died. Thomas listened quietly. He had never thought of himself as extraordinary. He had only remembered what hunger looked like and refused to ignore it. The story spread among both families. Children and grandchildren heard how, in the ruins of post-war Hamburg, a German mother asked an enemy soldier for food, and he returned with enough to save them. It is easy to measure war by battles, divisions, and casualty lists. Historians record the dates of offensives, the names of commanders, and the tonnage of bombs dropped on cities like Hamburg and London. Those facts matter, but they do not always capture the moments that reveal what people are capable of after the shooting stops. On February 14, 1946, Anna Fischer expected rejection. She expected suspicion, perhaps even punishment. Instead, she met a young British private who looked beyond uniforms and flags and saw 3 hungry children. That choice did not erase the war. It did not rebuild the city overnight. It did not bring back Carl Fischer or the millions who never returned home. But it kept one family alive. And in a world still covered in ruins, that was enough to change everything.